Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for coming. I would like to, I'm very excited to hear what our guest has to say, and I'd like Andrew Lewis to come up and introduce him, please.
Thank you, Ken. Sustainability, it's a big word, and it's quite a broad concept. And having listened to Ken Melamed last fall, it occurred to me that perhaps this is a concept for Saltspring Island, something that can unify the community for all of us to get behind. Now, last night we were inspired by another talk about sustainability that the Conservancy organized. Neil Dorr came and spoke about the definition of sustainability. And it's a very appealing concept. Nobody really wants to think that their lives and our communities are a burden on the future. But when you think about sustainability, we really are challenging some taboos in our communities. We're challenging the idea of economic growth and the ideas of population increasing. So we had an intellectual kind of experience last night thinking about the concepts of sustainability. What Ken Melamed has been able to do is to bring that on the ground in his community in Whistler, to bring the community together to talk about sustainability and agree on a path forward. And so that is a common front that I think Ken Melamed might be able to offer us today. Now, I've only just met Ken. We've emailed each other, and I heard him speak, as I said, last year. Ken Melamed, I've just found out, was before he was a politician, he was a stonemason. So it's true, landscapers can become politicians. He moved to Whistler in the late 60s, and as I said, he was a stonemason, had other careers, was a ski patrol guy. He was first elected as councillor for Whistler in '96, after a long period as an environmental activist in Whistler. And he was then elected as mayor of Whistler in 2005. So he is obviously, Whistler is the Olympic town for the Winter Olympics in 2010. Ken Melamed must be in a huge amount of demand to speak around the province and attend meetings. I think it's a huge privilege for him to make the effort to come and speak to us here on Saltspring Island. And with that in mind, I'm hoping that you'll give him a very warm welcome. Will you please put your hands together for His Worship, the Mayor of Whistler, Ken Melamed.
Turn this on. How's the volume there? Everybody here? Yeah. Thanks. Thanks for that nice introduction, Andrew. It's a great pleasure to be here, and it's not that exceptional or extraordinary when we get an invitation, when Whistler gets an invitation from anybody who's interested in sustainability, we generally respond in the affirmative. It's become something we've identified ourselves with, and it's something that we believe is important to share amongst and collaborate amongst those communities who are trying to join that journey. It's something that it's new ground for all of us. We haven't really had to deal with sustainability. We're the first generation, in fact, to have to deal with sustainability. Our parents didn't know that the planet's resources were being over-consumed as they built their futures and built our futures. So it's interesting that we are the first generation to have to deal with this, and so together we can share our learnings and successes and failures so that we can move ahead, and because we all know we have to solve these problems. So thanks. Just a couple small corrections. I've been in Whistler since the 70s. That's really fine-tuning, but it's my 33rd season there. I've worked for the mountain every year since I've been there. I'm still ski patrol because I can't get it out of my blood. I moved to Whistler to be a ski bum, and little did I know I would end up being the mayor of... Mike, how are you? See you. I want to introduce Councillor Eckhard Zeidler also, who's joined me and actually was my chauffeur, and he's providing accommodation. He and his family built a beautiful house here in the 90s, 1990 on Saltspring, and I've been able to get a little bit of background and a sense of some of the similarities, but of course there are many, many differences. Whistler is what it is. I don't make any excuses for it. It happened and evolved and developed before I became mayor. If I'd had a say, it wouldn't be what it is today. But understanding that, you know, one of the concepts about sustainability is you have to deal with what you have today. So we have an unsustainable planet, but it doesn't mean we start tearing things apart and blowing things up. So I inherited Whistler in the state it is in, and together as a community we're trying to create a path forward. Well, actually this is the wrong slide. Usually in that introduction it talks about developing a common language, and this is, so I'm talking about things that have worked for Whistler in our journey for sustainability. The need for a common language, the need to choose the future, and this is part of that language. You're going to be hearing some strange words and maybe strange concepts. It's called backcasting from science-based principles. And then the third one, which is on here, is the need and the understanding of every community that it has to get beyond its own borders and its own self, because there's a global call to action. Each one of us has a responsibility as global citizens, because the problems that are happening now as a result of population, increasing consumption, declining resources are global. So I'll talk a little bit about our path, how we got there, how we use it, and then hopefully we'll have some good chance for discussion. The slide I stole from Bill Reese, one of the professor who helped develop the ecological footprint. It says, so while the end of the world scenario will be rife with unimaginable horrors, we believe that the pre-end period will be filled with unprecedented opportunities for profit. Bill Reese is quite a fatalist, and when you listen to him, he doesn't give you a lot of sense of hope. What this speaks to is a need for us to understand what the risks are of short-term thinking. And it really, the reason I put it up there is one of the fundamental concepts about integrated community sustainability plans is the need for all communities to think long-term, all of us to be thinking long-term, because if we can continue to just look at the weeks and months and years ahead in front of us and short-term planning cycles, we're going to continue to make the same mistakes over and over. Again, to provide context, and again from Mathis Wackernagel and Bill Reese, if today's population, I think you all know this, but if the population enjoyed the same lifestyle as we did, we'd need 4 more planets. And good planets are hard to find. We're not going to be importing water from Mars when we use all of ours up. We're not going to be importing cod from Mars because we've overfished them. So why did Whistler do this? Why do communities need to develop sustainability plans or have processes that require them to work together collaboratively for the future? Every community has their own reasons. I'm going to share a couple of Whistler's, and maybe some of them resonate here. Our development funding was drying up. So Whistler's economic model was based on phenomenal development and growth through the 80s and 90s, particularly through the late 90s, tremendous growth. When I moved there in 1976, 500 people lived there. And what did we have? About 20,000 visitors a year. Now, 10,000 people live there, and we have over 2 million visitors a year. We represent about $1 billion annually to the BC economy. So a lot of business goes on in Whistler, and our economic model was going to change. Our economic model was going to change because in 1989, Whistler community put a moratorium on growth. The reason we did that was we had approved 52,000 beds for development. We'd only built 26,000 in 1989. And so somebody stepped back and said, whoa, we've only built half, we've got half more to go. We shouldn't be approving any more until we see what it looks like and we build it out. So we had a moratorium, and we were reaching what we call build out. That means there was very little development left to do, and therefore those funds that come from new development, that incremental growth to your tax base, and the DCCs, development cost charges, were going to dry up. And we had to choose and figure out and understand a new economic model to be successful. Competition changing, internet, last minute bookings, no longer competing just with ski resorts, but competing with beach resorts and Las Vegas and Disneyland. People now take holidays based on a variety of different factors, and if the snow's not good in Whistler, and they can find that out to the minute, live webcams, they're going to change their booking and go somewhere else. We had to prepare for a down cycle. We'd been on a growth curve through the 80s, 70s, 80s, 90s, and we reached our peak in 2000, where we had set a new record for skier visits in North America, 2.3 million skier visits, skier days per season. And incredible demand. The resort was booked out in the winter, but we knew that after every upcycle is a down cycle. How did we prepare economically for that economic downturn? And then how do we manage pressures that we knew were going to come at us? Developers were getting increasingly sophisticated with development proposals trying to entice the community to lift its bed cap, its self-imposed growth cap. And here was the Olympics. How the heck do we manage something like that? So we set about on a process, a long-term sustainability process. We didn't understand this at first, but it became pretty obvious early on that we needed to look at Whistler. Everything is a system. And it's much more powerful to look at systems instead of individual moves. The individual moves are an important part of getting us to where we want to go. And again, to understand how we operate within the system that is the planet. Here's another concept, and in some ways it's a little out of sequence, but it gets back to where I started out, this shared need to have a shared language about sustainability. So we all know what we're talking about, and we dispel some of the early myths. So we know that sustainability is the balance or the overlap, the consideration of these three spheres: economy, society, environment. We've heard analogies like three-legged stool, triple bottom line. We've seen diagrams like this. But these diagrams are in some ways destructive, and they impede our progress in developing that shared language and agreement on sustainability. Because you have to ask yourself, in that bottom sphere, economy, where it doesn't integrate with society and environment, where is that on the planet? That diagram suggests that you can have economy without environment and society. Well, that's absolutely not the case. So here's another diagram that we think tells the accurate story, that they're balanced, they're fully integrated. It's a nested hierarchy, is one way of talking about it. So the economy depends on society, and society and the economy depend on a healthy environment. That's not to say, so what this says very powerfully to the business sector and to the environment sector, we're all in this together. We can't be talking about one without talking about the other. Every time, every decision, all three spheres need to be addressed, because there are no decisions that exist outside of the others. Where we learned that from was this methodology known as the natural step. I want to throw out a whole heap of caveats here. The natural step, my experience in talking about it for 2 years since I've been mayor and having gone through the development of it, it scares a lot of people. You are going to have negative reactions to this terminology and this name. Some people call it a cult. Some people hate being suggested that there's one way better than another, and they also don't like the idea of having to talk philosophically about sustainability. They just want to get to action. Just tell me how to recycle more. As we went through the sustainability community development process, we came upon this system, and we found it to be very powerful. I'm going to suggest to you that if you can put aside some of your immediate, the negative reactions that may come up, try and keep an open mind to the potential power of a tool like this. It's a tool a little bit like the software you have on your computer. Your computer is a great device, but without software to operate, you might as well not have it. It's kind of like an Excel program or a Microsoft Word. It's a tool that enables you to be successful in what you're doing. So it comes with this framework. It's a 5-level system. And it comes with another bunch of the things, so I'm going to give you that in pieces. One of the things the scientists that developed the natural step, Dr. Carl Henrik Robert, by the way, was a Swedish scientist who developed it. They couldn't agree on what would make a sustainable planet. And they debated and argued about this apparently for a year. And then finally somebody, like scientists will do, is let's turn it around. Let's put it on its head. How can we destroy the planet? What would be an effective way to wreck the place? And they came up with 4 ways. We can dig it up too fast, we can poison it, we can destroy the engines, and that's a euphemism for deforestation or desertification or overfishing. And 4, we can prevent people from meeting their needs, so they have to go out and cut the last tree or kill the last fish or go to war, for instance, to get clean water or whatever they want. So they agreed on these 4 systems, and they tested it. So now this is 18 years old, these concepts of the natural step, and they have stood the test of time. So effectively, these are the 4 ways we can kill the planet, and therefore they developed 4 science and systems-based principles that we can follow to be sustainable. And again, some people have a problem with the way the wording is formulated. It's worded back in the negative. Well, because it came from those 4 ways that we can destroy the planet. In a sustainable society, there would not be systematically increasing concentrations of materials taken from the Earth's crust. You're not going to love this. I didn't get it, and I'm a devoted environmental activist. I heard this for the first time and I scratched my head going, what the heck? We don't have time for this in Whistler. Let's go. We got a plan. We got to get on, fix the environment, and screw the rest. But after six times maybe that I heard it, it started to really take root, and it makes so much sense. So if we can take a little bit of time, again, put aside the negative reactions and allow this stuff to take time to gain understanding, it's actually quite simple and beautiful in its simplicity. There's a lot of science that goes behind these 4 principles. So in other words, this talks about taking materials out of the Earth's crust. Well, what the science behind this is to measure what materials are the most abundant. So if the Earth needs to be able to assimilate all these materials that we're taking out of the ground, what are the ones that are easiest for it to assimilate? For instance, aluminum, incredibly abundant. We can't introduce more aluminum into the system that it can accommodate. But mercury and cadmium and things like that are danger signs. The second system condition is we can't systematically increase concentrations of human-made compounds. So we've all seen that study, a very powerful study of the chemicals they found in the breast milk of Eskimo women, Inuit women. It's a list of hundreds of chemicals long. So this is pretty intuitive. I think most of us understand that there are a number of chemicals that have been introduced that society, that nature has a hard time dealing with. DDT come to mind, the persistent organic pollutants, and like that. Included in this would be carbon dioxide. The planet cannot systematically accept increasing concentrations of carbon dioxide. We've overwhelmed the capacity of the planet to deal with this stuff. The third one deals with, again, the engine, the ecological systems that provide all the wealth that we know. So we can't continue to see ongoing degradation of these systems by physical means. And the fourth one, and again, another caveat, there's some criticisms I hear. The natural step doesn't talk enough about social issues. But fundamentally, the first 3 actually have tremendous social implications. As I said, if you're cutting down the last tree and the community can't cook its meals, that's a social condition. If the community's running out of food, that's a social condition, but it relates to the first 3. But this is, again, this has some powerful science in behind it. Some work done by a gentleman named Manfred Max Neef, who identified the 9 basic human needs. This helps describe what humans need to feel safe and secure. Before they would, assuming you have these things, you really don't need to go to war to go and get them. Or you don't need to deplete your own or foul your own nest. Here they are in one simple list, the 4 principles. You know, I'm going into a little bit of detail here. You're not going to remember it all. Hopefully this is a bit of a taste and incentive to maybe learn more. I encourage you to try and find a place where you can listen again. Like I said, it took me 4 or 5 times to get it. But the good news is that once you learn it, or like once you learn how to use your Excel software, you don't think about it again. It's there for you to access, to go back to. And this is another important point. So as a community, when you go forward, and if you commit to this journey and together seek out what a sustainable future might mean for Salt Spring, it's very, very important to establish a solid foundation from which you can go back should you stumble in the future. And you will. You will be tested continually about how to define what you've agreed to. You need to have those really solid foundations to come back to, and this is the thing that can anchor you back. It's the most fundamental. They come from science. They're simple. It's something everybody can understand. They're applicable from the smallest decision to buying pens to deciding on whether nuclear power is beneficial or not. It really is so robust and so accessible and useful. So that's why it's important to take time to build those foundations. In Whistler, we began on the sustainability journey. We found out about the natural step, and we actually retrenched, took a step back, taught the community what the natural step was, so that when we moved forward, we had this to come back to, these foundations. The foundations like what are your shared values in your community? What are the things that you can agree on moving forward? Take the time to find out what you agree on before you get into debates about what you don't agree on. Our path, we had a 5-year plan. Most communities in BC, well, all communities have an official community plan. It needs to be revised every few years. When we did our 5-year plan in 1996, it included a commitment to environmental stewardship. As we were pursuing this environmental stewardship document, we were introduced to the natural step. Dr. Robert, through a stroke of some minor miracle, came to Whistler on a snowboarding vacation with his sons. And there was an individual who knew of Whistler's having adopted this commitment to environmental sustainability and said, you should hear from Dr. Robert. Dr. Robert came and spoke to our community. We brought some key business leaders and council, and he really inspired us to take a further look at his framework, and we ended up adopting it. We inserted it into our plan. One of the ways you do that is by getting buy-in across all the sectors of the community. So these are what we call our early adopters. We knew this was going to be a little bit controversial. Nobody had done this before. Nobody in Canada had introduced the natural step. We were the first community in North America to do this. And we were a little scared. We were scared about having to take the time to share this with the community, what the buy-in would be, what the resistance would be. Well, we knew enough to know that if we didn't have support from some key parts of the community, we might not be successful. So we went out and signed up these early adopters. The resort municipality in the bottom right, the Fairmont Chateau, one of the anchors, one of the chains in the Fairmont chain. Whistler Blackcomb, the largest employer and the operator of the Two Mountains. They were right there with us. They had heard Dr. Robert and they understood. They were able to see enough of the potential of this message and the need to have this collaborative approach and buy-in from the community. The local environmental group was there, our tourism organizing group, and a local small businessman, Whistler 1 Hour Photo. Eckert was instrumental. He was one of the directors of AWARE at the time and helped build that buy-in. We trained our staff. We trained people in the community in the natural step. Because it's not something you learn in the 10 minutes I can talk about it. You need to sit through a session. And then we trained trainers who could then internally within the resort kind of spread this out at the grassroots level so that there was a broad enough understanding that when we got together in a room, there were enough people who had a sense of what it was, they could speak to it, and were supporters. Some people call this community-based social marketing. It's a relatively new science. But it's humans are very strange We're a strange society we've created for ourselves, and we now study ourselves to death, and we understand how to actually enact some of these changes. And it worked for us. We created a project to imagine and invent our future. So you remember the second point was to choose your future from backcasting. We had this tension in our community, as you do in yours. How do we define ourselves in the future? We had this self-imposed moratorium on development and growth, and yet there was a never-ending demand for, well, I've got this opportunity here. I'd like to subdivide my lot over here. Hotel suggested that they thought they had development rights to double the size of the number of rooms in their hotel. A store that wanted to add extra square feet and push out into the patio, into the stroll. It just kept coming. And so we needed to test in the community what their commitment was to the future. What path were we going to choose? So what we did was, with the help of a computer model program developed at UBC called Quest, which helps just really describe the multiple impacts of a variety of decisions. We created 5 futures to help generate discussion in the community. So rather than leaving it completely abstract as to what the future might be, we tried to define it in 5 sort of options, and one of them would be status quo. Number 1 was status quo. We don't do anything different. No, we don't lift the growth cap. We don't expand commercial. Just as a little side note, in a place like Whistler, where we have a hard time housing our employees, if we allow a business to expand without creating accommodation for those employees, we're shooting ourselves in the foot. We already can't keep up with the demand for accommodation for our service workers, the people that make the resort work. So why would we continue to expand commercial when we can't accommodate the people that we already operate the stores? Right now, actually, that is coming back to hit us very hard, because as many of you know, there is a building boom in Alberta and BC, economic boom, and we are short between 300 and 500 employees in the wintertime in Whistler. We can't get them. One of the reasons we can't get them is because we can't find a place to house them. So thank goodness at one point, about 5 years ago, we started asking questions to the request to expand a commercial space. We said, hold it, we can't agree to expand your commercial space, unless of course you want to build housing for all of those staff. Don't come and talk to us, because we can't be responsible for providing that accommodation. So those are some of the things that Quest can model for you when you make a choice. If you're going to expand, so one of the choices was to diversify the economy outside of tourism. Many people from the business sector, Chamber of Commerce, thought we should have a high-tech business park. Of course, we could attract, because of the lifestyle in Whistler, we could attract some of the high-tech sector. Did we want to do that? Or did we want to stay with a tourism-based economic model? Should we increase the market housing? Should we raise the bed cap? The suggestion was 750 beds. And we could, with those development rights, we could entice developers to come, and we could get maybe some very good community amenities. So we went out, we created these 5 scenarios, and we asked the community to tell us what they thought about them. So we tested ourselves on the future. In the end, we took what we call the blended scenario, which was essentially number 1, business as usual, stay the course, do not diversify outside of tourism, do not raise the bed cap, do not expand any more market housing. There was an allowance to build more housing for employees and to try and find ways to do that. The culmination, after we had narrowed down the successful candidate of the 5 futures, is Whistler 2020. It establishes 5 community priorities. Again, these are fundamental core values of the community that we can come back to when it gets messy out there and somebody's testing and wants to understand, how does this decision or that decision fit with the future? We go, well, does it meet any of these priorities? Or does it contradict any of these priorities? Does it contradict the principles of the natural step definitions of sustainability? In order to implement this, we decided this is a sort of an exercise in direct democracy. 16 task forces were created, consistent with some of the directions and the priorities that we determined in Whistler 2020. Each of these task forces was populated with multi-sectoral representation from the community. So in total, 150 people came out to populate these 16 task forces, and they sat down together and defined where Whistler was at in each of these areas, where it wanted to go, what actions we could take in the next year, and how we would measure success. So this is how we've implemented what we've done. There's a real danger and very common. Everybody's really fearful of investing time and energy in a plan that's going to go and sit on a shelf somewhere. This plan doesn't do that. This plan is alive and it's active in everyday life in Whistler. In fact, becoming more so. One of the challenges, I've got a slide in here that quotes Ray Anderson, because it continues to be probably the overriding challenge is how do you bring business and community value issues to get agreement. And business tends to be afraid of the word sustainability. They think it's going to hamper their ability to be successful and prosperous, and we all actually have that concern. There's many people. But Ray Anderson is the president of Interface Carpets, the largest carpet manufacturing company in North America, who heard about the natural step and went through what he called a midlife course correction, mid-course correction. He wrote a book called that. And he turned his company around, and now it has become, at first it was ostracized by Wall Street. They didn't understand, and they thought, who's this crazy idiot talking about sustainability? But his stock has now tripled because he has saved so much money by following sustainability principles and adhering to those 4 system principles of the natural step. He's reduced his need for energy. He's reduced his need to clean up pollutants. It's just been an incredible story. If you ever have a chance to read the book or hear him speak, he's wonderful. So stories and examples like Ray Anderson, he came to Whistler. We had a speaker series to try and learn together about what the lessons were about sustainability, and Ray came and inspired the community in a very significant way. People came from Nike in Oregon who had also embraced TNS. Natural Step started in the private sector. We were the first community in North America, as I said, but North American businesses have embraced, and now Walmart, in fact, went over to Sweden and spent 2 weeks with Dr. Robert, and they're starting to implement some of these principles. I throw this slide in because there's good news about sustainability, as hard a word as it is and how difficult as it is, and as much as we fear the community's reaction to talking about it and committing to it, this study shows that there's in fact a critical mass that is already there existing to be successful, and that we don't have to waste our time with the people on the bottom. So people are going to show up to meetings and say, I contest climate change. And I'm going to stand up and say, sit down. We don't need to hear from you, because the rest of us think that there is reason to believe in climate change. I don't mean to be rude, but frankly, we actually don't have a whole lot of time. Those people who understand and are reading and are current with the challenges that the planet is facing, we're on a fairly short time frame, and we've spent too much time already dealing with the naysayers who have been well funded by industry from vested interests. There's abundant evidence, incontrovertible evidence now that the planet is falling apart around us, and we need to do something differently. We can no longer do business as usual, but the good news, and we didn't know this when we went to it. Had we known, we went, it saved us ourselves a bunch of time and money. But it's a good slide for people to remember when they go forward, and if there's any fear and trepidation about moving forward. There is confusion about sustainability. And again, this is why we're so bullish on Natural Step, because we think it's the one framework that all the others nest under. And in fact, Dr. Robert called these guys together because there was so much controversy and debate. Well, should I use the ecological footprint, or should I use triple bottom line, or Agenda 21? So Dr. Robert called up the leading experts in each one of these areas. Mathis Wackernagel went from ecological footprint, and they did a study, and they tried to understand, and in fact, the Natural Step was agreed to by all as the one overarching framework that all these other tools are great. They're very useful tools, and there's some very good stuff there. Again, the Natural Step is the one that encapsulates them all. Benefits of a shared framework and that shared language is so we can talk to each other. So when I say the word backcasting, the people in the room in Whistler understand what that is. When we talk about descriptions of success, or when we talk about violating System Condition 4, those are parts of the language which aren't in our lexicon right now. And we want, so describing that square with the arrow through it is one thing. Describing these curvy lines, it's different. This is more of the representation about sustainability. It's kind of fuzzy. Nobody has solved it yet. We are the first to have to do this. One of the things that helped in Whistler's case was a history of planning and innovation. And this, the reason I keep this slide in, because again, there's this tendency to avoid these fundamental steps of planning and sitting down and talking with each other about what we share as values, what we can agree on. You can't just jump to action. We had our first 3 open houses in Whistler. And the first one was to learn from other, Aspen and Vail. We hired consultants from Aspen and Vail to tell us what is the description of success for resort communities around North America? And what should we understand about it? Well, that first meeting, people came and put up their hands and says, I think we should increase the size of the recycling center, and I think we should electrify the landfill so the bears can't get in there. And we had to say, thank you for your ideas. Keep them, write them down, hold them for when we get to actions. We're starting with a process to understand the conditions of our success and the places we can go and choose into the future. Well, this was an artist's conception back before the village was built. For those who don't know, the village was built on the landfill. We closed the landfill, and now you have, that was the original site clearing in '78. And now, for those of you who've been there, it's some people call it Disneyland North. It's quite, for many people, artificial. It isn't the quaint European town that the original architect imagined it to be. It is what it is. It's still a great place. It provides a lot of positive experiences for the people that visit, obviously indicated by our success. Doesn't make everybody happy, but certainly there's enough people that come, and I have to say there's people like me who've been there for 30 years who thought I might leave because I didn't like what was happening around me. But you learn to adapt and cherish the parts about the place that are still magical and special. For many of us, it's not in the village. For many of it's in the trails, and of course we have, like you, we have almost instant access. Behind my house, I can go out into the wilderness and still have easy access to all those things that make Whistler magical, and at the same time go in and find world-class amenities in the village. So in some ways, it's the best of both worlds. It's challenging for new people to come into Whistler because of the price, and there's some things that you can understand about your choices that can moderate that. Again, if I had been the mayor in 1980, of course that's an impossibility. And that's just interesting. I would not be the mayor of Whistler if it wasn't for Whistler 2020 and the natural step. I was a frightening entity for the business community. I was an environmental activist, and that's how I was branded. But when we started talking about sustainability in the concept that business is actually fundamental to our success, economy is fundamental to the success of Whistler and has to be incorporated into every decision, that allowed a person like Ken Melamed to come forward and say, you don't have to be afraid of me, because when we talk sustainability, we're including you. You're in the conversation. We're all in the conversation. And it doesn't suggest that we're going to have to impoverish ourselves or suddenly do with much less. We believe that I believe anyway, I mean, you can believe what you want, that the human condition, human society is so innovative and inventive, we can invent a new future for ourselves within the constraints that the sustainability principles suggest to us. We just need to have to figure out how to do it different. We've heard new paradigm. So this is the funnel metaphor that comes out of the natural step teaching. It's a simple graphical way to understand these two colliding directions that are happening on the planet. Our natural ecosystems are in a state of decline, and we have increasing population and consumption. If those two lines converge, we are unsustainable, and we're heading that way. We know that we need to flatten them out so that we can get to a sustainable society and invent what that is. When there's I don't have a pointer, but if you had a direction that was going above that parallel area, we call that hitting the walls of the funnel. It's hitting the walls of the funnel of unsustainability, part of that language. May sound cumbersome, but it becomes useful. So this is the backcasting process. And, it's quite mind-numbing, actually, when you actually sit down and say, well, how do we define ourselves 60 years out? We're not used to doing that. As people, we are not used to really thinking about that. We're thinking, a year down the road, we're going to be in 2 years, 5 years. Well, we chose a 60-year time horizon for a very practical reason. We know that the infrastructure that's in the ground, the pipes and the sewers, have a design life of about 60 years. Many of the buildings in the village have a design life of 60 years. So it's not very powerful for us to say, we don't think those systems are efficient, so we're going to dig them up tomorrow. We need to wait until their design life is expired to begin thinking about undoing them. The other really spectacular thing that happens when you take these long-term views is that the political realities and constraints of the day evaporate. You stop asking questions about how can we afford that, or how can we do that politically, because none of us are going to be here. We don't have to worry about that. And so it was very liberating for us to begin to look at these long-term time horizons. And when you do that, you actually get complete buy-in. Of course, we all want to have clean air, clean water. We want our kids to be happy and prosperous. We want our kids to have happy and prosperous kids. So, the contentious issues of the day kind of melt away, and you find those areas where you agree. So we looked out, we called it Whistler 2020, a 20-year vision with a 60-year outlook. As I said, the task forces got together and described what success might look like, and the community did this together to a degree. And then we apply the system principles, these constraints of sustainability, so that we don't make unsustainable decisions. And then we backcast. We look back to where Whistler is today and choose actions that take us towards the shared description of success. So, for example, very contentious, we chose a population of 14,000. We're 9,500 today. With the help of the Quest modeling system, and when we calculated how many employee beds we might need to get to a sustainable economic model, it looked like 14,000 was about the right number. So we chose that as a population. Most communities will hire David Baxter or some demographic scientist to tell them how many people they expect to move there in the next 20 years. And then you have to accommodate that growth. That's what we've done in the regional district north and south of us. And they say, well, we're going to grow to 60,000 in the next 20 years. And there's some of us in Whistler, they're going, well, that's fine for Whistler and Squamish and Pemberton, but not Whistler. We're pretty clear that we've got enough people living in Whistler right now to have a happy balance economically, socially, and environmentally. Just one example of some of the choices you can make, and then your actions back from today take you to that description of success. Four strategic questions. Again, does the action, so when we test in actions that come forward, does the action move us toward our shared description of success? Does the action move us towards our sustainability objectives? Sorry, there's a word missing there. Those are the 4 system conditions. Is it a flexible platform? So if we commit to this today and things change or things aren't as we assumed they might be, how flexible are they? Because we don't want to commit to bad ideas or making mistakes. Sometimes these are hard questions to answer, but an example is when Terrace and Gas said they wanted to take down the propane tank farms. They had propane. We have a large propane system in Whistler, one of the biggest in BC, as a matter of fact. And Terracin had demands for more propane. They came to council and said, we want to increase the size of the tank farms. And council really didn't, for a variety of reasons, didn't like the sound of that. Well, nobody likes tank farms. They're dangerous. They're ugly. And they actually don't address demand-side management. And there's a tremendous investment in them. So we asked Terracin to look for other solutions. What were other solutions that were more flexible for us? And what came back was a pipeline for natural gas. Because natural gas would be expandable. It would be something we could use to power the buses in our bus fleet. It would be something we could use to power alternate generation. It would give us a hedge against some of the more volatile fuels. So through that, because expanding the tank farm and committing to propane was less flexible than the pipeline, working with Terracin, we were able to get them to invest in a pipeline to Whistler. Is it a good financial investment? Obviously, you can only afford to move as fast as we can afford to move. I mean, it's nice to be able to dream to do X, Y, and Z, but money is not something we print. These are some examples of how this was implemented and measured. Each task force, as I said, developed their shared descriptions of success and came up with indicators on how they would be measured. I've gone into some of the benefits of the comprehensive approach, just again to reinforce. It's a shared language. It helps promote understanding and collaboration cross-sectoral. It was something that enabled us to get a dialogue between all the divergent sectors in Whistler. It's useful at all the planning scales. It's proactive and upstream. Any of you who have been involved in waste reduction know that it's simply not enough to recycle. We need to be looking up the supply chains to minimize waste before it has to get to the point of recycling. It's non-prescriptive. This was something that was critical to get buy-in from the community at large. The natural step framework and descriptions of success don't say, they're not really explicit on time frame. So it says, that's why that wording going back to it says systematically increasing. It doesn't say tomorrow you're going to stop polluting. It understands that there are systems in place that have committed us, these non-flexible platforms, have committed us to polluting for a number of years into the future. But that we shouldn't be taking decisions that incrementally and systematically increase them. And that by the inverse, we should be pursuing decisions that effectively decrease those contributions to unsustainability. The values, definition, promise, relationships. There's a part in there that I wanted to talk about because I understand there's some political challenges and disagreement here on Salt Spring. We had those in Whistler. I think many communities do. But again, I want to reinforce, when we adopted this plan in 2004, there was a municipal election in 2005. To a person, we have 6 councillors and the mayor, we all endorsed this plan. It really takes a little bit about the controversy and the selfness, the ego out of the political process. Because this is not me, this is not my plan. This is the community-owned plan. And when I, as a politician, when Eckert as a politician stands up and talks about descriptions of success for the community, those are not his descriptions of success. They're our descriptions of success. We can point to this plan that we built together as a community. It really takes so much of the political infighting out of decisions. It takes us beyond 3-year election cycles, because this is a plan for 60 years. And as mayor, I stand for that plan. And I don't have to stand up there and say, in 3 years' time, I'm going to bloody well do this, this, and this, which is the typical 3-year election cycle that we tend to get trapped in and seems to be fairly non-productive, because politicians bounce around like this based on where the community seems to be pushing. And special interest groups have the power to do that. When you take the time to get community buy-in and buy-in across all sectors, it takes a lot of that infighting and that special interest manipulation, I'll call it manipulation of the political process, out of it. It takes a lot of the ego out of it. And I personally find it very empowering. It has produced an incredibly harmonious council. We do not, one of my personal rules as mayor is I don't allow any personal attack. You can't take a councillor's name and insult them at my council table. We provide opinions based on our communities, and we are doing that it's not personal. We are acting on behalf of the community, and together we are delivering what the community asks us to deliver. These are the descriptions of success. These are the actions that the community has decided, and wonderfully, it's moving us towards sustainability in what we all have agreed is the direction we all have to go. This just suggests that we're not alone. Since Whistler adopted the TNS, it has spread across Canada. There are now, I don't know, Rochelle, 10, 12 other communities across Canada. I've lost count.
Yeah, that sounds right.
That sounds about right. And of course, many of these companies, don't be deceived, McDonald's North America has not endorsed a natural step, but McDonald's Sweden did. There's a really interesting story. Dr. Robert got a call one night, actually 3 o'clock in the morning, he said. The president of McDonald's Sweden called him and said, Dr. Robert, geez, this is kind of scary. When I think about the system additions, it means that maybe there's not a future for hamburgers. Again, he can't change that overnight, but it was an epiphany for him. There's interface. This one, hydro, down in the second one up from the corner. Hydropolymers. I was in Sweden last year, and this is the largest polyvinyl chloride manufacturer in the world. Many of you know polyvinyl chloride is one of the big no-nos. Dioxin, the most toxic chemical. Well, these guys have come to the table. Dr. Robert said, you know, what you're doing is inherently unsustainable. How can you fix it? And they have taken that seriously. They're looking at their systems to try and reduce their contributions to those non-sustainable emissions. It's fascinating to see what happens when businesses understand their responsibility and understand that it's non-prescriptive. They don't have to do it overnight, but they commit to the process. I thought I'd talk about some of the things Whistler has done. You can argue about their degree of success over the years to control growth pressures. One of the first things we did was we changed the lot size minimum for subdividing parcels of land. There was a time when we didn't think anyone would spend $5 million for a lot to build a single family house. That day came, and it's long since gone. People will spend $10 million for a lot to build a single family house if we let them. But we don't allow subdivision into 20-acre parcels. It's a minimum 100-acre parcel subdivision, and it has been an effective control of rampant sprawl within the community. Employee housing requirements and covenants. We were the first community in Canada to ask the province for a development cost charge for employee housing. Understanding that the development of the village would generate significant funds and significant demands. One of the things we learned, back up a second, if you can find a parallel to yourselves, a community that has made sustainability decisions in the past, go study them. Whistler Council has been 3 times on exploratory missions. I've been on 2 now. We go to Aspen, we go to Vail, we go to Snowmass, we go to Breckenridge, Park City, all the other resort communities in North America that have had to deal with some of the challenges. When we went to Aspen in 1996, 97, they said, do something about employee housing before it's too late. We waited it was too late for us. They're playing catch up. So we took that to heart and we created the Housing Authority in Whistler. And since then we have built about 250 units. We generated through that development cost charge about $6 million fund to build housing. We leveraged that through financing to $30 million, and we built a number of projects ourselves. But we also began to require developers and businesses to provide housing. And we wouldn't approve the development unless they built housing based on a formula that was actually not significant enough. We wish we had been able to change that number earlier on, but unfortunately the province of BC sat on those equivalencies. But what it's done is it's created 4,000 beds in Whistler that are restricted inventory. So we have legal covenants that say you must work in Whistler to live in this accommodation. It fixes the sale price of the unit for purchase ones, and it fixes the resale price. And for the rental ones, it fixes by covenant a rental rate. 4,000 restricted beds has resulted in our ability to house 75% of our workforce in Worcester. That's a chosen community target, something that was reaffirmed in the Worcester 2020 Visioning for the Future. Lots of people think that none of the workers live in Worcester. Not true. 75% of us live there, and we're building more. Our Athletes Village for the games it will be 85% employee housing after the games. We have an urban containment boundary and a protected area network policy. Very important. Sprawl was something we learned not to do in Park City. If you go to Park City outside of Salt Lake, you will see the rolling hillsides uninterrupted by development. There's virtually no undeveloped land left, no public land left. So we understood, and this is interesting because it's not just environmental, this is an important economic motivator for us. We're a tourism-based, outdoor recreation-based economy. Tourists need a place to go out and enjoy the recreation in. And if it was all developed, that was not going to be consistent with that description of success. So environmental protection, urban containment, commitment to smart growth principles, densification, walking trails, alternate transportation modes, we do all those good things. We have a policy, CC1 is our commercial core. We froze the density in the commercial core. Unfortunately, when they developed the village, the planners at that time in 1976 could not imagine what it would look like. So they created what they call enabling zoning numbers. So they created a gross number of gross floor area, and they said, oh, that should be about right. That should enable us to get done what we need to do. And so the first hotels built what was reasonable, and now they're coming back and say, oh, well, but you actually zoned it up another 4 stories and another 200 rooms. We have too much accommodation in Worcester. Another bubble burst for many people. Think we're booked all year long. We're only at 50% occupancy. This is an economic nightmare for us. We built too much. Another good reason, thank goodness we had that moratorium, and we've frozen density in the village core in respect of that knowledge. And let's fix what we've got today. Let's fill what we have today before we approve more. Design guidelines, because we understood that it needed to look good and to be respectable, to be successful. We have a design panel. Eckert sits on that as well. And every development that comes through, not every development, no single family, but the commercial developments that are being built within the existing cap go through a rigorous design guideline process, which now includes green building guidelines. We've developed our own green building checklist, and Council is quickly moving to mandatory minimums on green building requirements. Tourist accommodation. I understand there's a little bit of a challenge here. We woke up one day to find 80 homes in Whistler booked for the winter by British tour groups. These homes used to house our employees. They were second homes that were owned by non-residents, and we understand they were used they were rented to employees. Until these British tour groups came up and said, I'll give you $80,000 for that home for the season. Who wouldn't? I'm going on holiday. And the British tour operator would move, in a house that was supposed to house 8 people, would put 20 British skiers in there, bring in their own cook and cleaner. They ate their own meals in the houses and wouldn't, and they called them the chalets, and didn't contribute much into the economy of the village, and were overtaking some of our resident housing inventory. We were getting complaints from residents who, in their residential neighborhood, were having 3 Greyhound coaches or perimeter, private coaches dropping off all of these British tourists in their subdivision, and Koning's wholesale semi-trailers backing into the driveway, unloading 2 months of food. And the residents said to us, I moved into a residential neighborhood. I didn't move next to a hotel. What's council doing? How come you're letting this happen? So we had to move to an enforcement policy and crack down and effectively force these businesses to relocate into zoned areas for tourist accommodation and out of residential neighborhoods. It was very controversial. It cost us a lot of money, But out of respect for those people who bought into residential neighborhoods, we really had no choice. Fact was, we had an alternative. So when you can provide an alternative, it makes it much easier. We had 14,000 beds of tourist accommodation. And again, to protect those people, there was the other issue. Bed and breakfast operators who had paid good money to meet the code requirements to legally accommodate 15 or 20 people were being undercut by these other homes who were operating illegally. So we zoned tourist accommodation areas, enforced those people who were violating in the residential zone, and put a cap on bed and breakfasts per subdivision. So 5% of all the homes in a subdivision is the maximum number of bed and breakfasts you can have in that subdivision, in an attempt to stop the bed and breakfast from overwhelming the residential character of the neighborhood. It's been successful, and I believe it's been very successful. One of the important things it did was it protected some of our employee housing inventory, but it also protected the residential quality. Good neighbor agreement, something we've signed with the bars because we have noise issues and over-serving issues and drunkenness and rowdiness issues. You don't have to face that, thank goodness. But we have a tremendous amount of tension in Whistler about the need to accommodate the young crowd as well as the old crowd. Where are the young kids going to come and party and have fun? Fortunately, the village is a bit of an echo chamber. And when the bars let out at 2 o'clock in the morning, everybody is woken up, and my phone rings. So we haven't resolved the issue, but we do have these good neighbor agreements whereby we use this term partnership over and over and over and over. The RMOW can't be successful working by itself in isolation, and together, if we all agree to work together and address issues from a common front, then we have a chance of success. So we have 38 organizations in Whistler who've signed onto our Whistler 2020 document. They've endorsed it. They've said, we'll work with you. We understand, we respect your values, and we will accept actions. So it's something I didn't touch on. When the task forces commit actions, they're not just to the resort municipality local government. They submit actions to Whistler Blackcomb. They submit actions to the library. They submit actions to the Arts Council, because we're all in it together. Sustainability is something that we share as a common goal. Some of the lessons learned. It has to be relevant. Obviously, I'm telling you examples about Whistler which are not readily transferable here. You will have your own issues. And so what are the points that the community needs to feel genuinely engaged on? But when we measure our greenhouse gas emissions, it's not a happy picture. But we measure it because we need to tell the truth to ourselves about what it looks like and what the size of the challenge looks like. But we measure things like room nights as well. We measure things like economic median income and the amount of revenue from arts and culture. For us, it was a motivator to be a leader. Do you want to be a leader or do you want to be a follower? Would you like people to think of Salt Spring as a community that has stepped up and committed to the journey for sustainability, or are they still mired in debate and controversy and agonizing infighting? Get out there and show leadership. Demonstrate that it can be done. Maybe you can be the first of the Gulf Islands to get it right and share that model. Whistler understood fundamentally that with 2 million visitors coming a year, there was an opportunity to tell people from around the planet about what we were doing. And actually the recognition is coming. We're starting an economic generator, a Whistler Center for Sustainability, to try and capitalize on that and share what we've learned, because there's a tremendous demand. And we want to demonstrate, we want people to think of us as a sustainable community. It's an oxymoron for many people. And if we count the greenhouse gas emissions related to people traveling to Whistler, it's frightening. I'll see if I can pull up the slide for you later. Demonstrate integration with the economic sector. I think I've gone into that well. Invite your critics. Bring them to the table. Get them on those task forces. Bring them into the meetings. We struck a community advisory group, and the loudest mouthpieces in the community were brought in. And we listened to them, and we talked to them, and we got to a point where we would get to agreement. Or they would be outvoted, and it was fascinating for me to be in some of those meetings. You know, these guys would stand up there and say, I believe this, this, and this, and this, and the rest of the group would look at them and go, where are you coming from? We've been through that already. The rest of us don't agree. So we've heard you, we've considered it, and now we're moving on. We're moving forward. Need to balance planning and actions. I said take the time to plan, but you also need to demonstrate success. Build confidence in the processes. So we talk, TNS talks about low-hanging fruit, early wins. This is actually fairly simple, a great story. One of the women who helped our task forces, Victoria Smith, went to Dar es Salaam and was having a heck of a time with the mayor over there to have him understand the need to get collaborative processes. But she built one under a tourism, bringing the tourism sector together, and showed they got an easy early win, and the mayor is now suddenly embracing this idea of collaborative partnerships and community planning and visioning. In Dar es Salaam, it's so, life is so chaotic and in such critical disarray, they don't feel they have time to do any planning. They're always putting out fires. They're running from one catastrophe to the other. But finally, she was able to embed the concept with the mayor that there was some power to planning and looking ahead. And so we hope that we can build on that learning. Take risks and learn. It's not a perfect science, but with some of the tools we have, we can go forward whereby we minimize some of the risks. Obviously, financial risks are very dangerous, but there are some other risks that are worth taking. Communication, we're having this debate all the time at our council. How do you effectively communicate versus just informing people what you're doing? Those are fundamental parts of relationship building. I think I've gone into the why the natural step. 18 years old, robust. Nobody's been able to poke a hole in it. It's there for you to use as a tool. It doesn't have to be front and center, but it's there in the background waiting to be accessed. Thank you. That's the end of the presentation. I'm going to see if I can pull up that slide. I think you'll enjoy the one on greenhouse gas emissions. I can find it. There it is. It's kind of hard to read, but one of the outcomes of the Energy Task Force and the Air Quality Task Force, the Climate Change Task Force, all three of them said we need to measure our greenhouse gas emissions. We are, as many communities are, members of the Partners for Climate Protection. It was an initiative of the Federation of Canadian Municipalities, and it asked communities to commit to a 20% reduction internally of municipal greenhouse gas emissions. Kind of hard to read, but if the long bars there, the olive ones, those are the emissions related to travel to and from Whistler. The dark green bar that's just above that, the greenhouse gas emissions related to the community as a whole, internally within our boundaries. The lines that you can barely see down in 2006, 2007, and the third group up there that barely register, those are our municipal emissions. As hard as it is for us to get our municipal emissions down by 20%, because don't forget, back in 1989, we committed to all this growth. We couldn't stop that growth. Our greenhouse gas emissions have gone up 30%, 33%. We have some work to do. But look at the frightening contrast between the external emissions. It almost makes reducing our emissions by 20% insignificant when you look at the magnitude of the challenge of the travel to and from Whistler. So what it does is it provides perspective for us. It suggests that we need to be moving, and we are already. We've included a carbon offset tool. There's another debate about that onto our website, our booking website, booking engine, so that people who are traveling can take that option. We know, for instance, we need to move in direction of extending people's holidays. So rather than taking 3 one-week trips to Whistler, maybe they'll take 2 4-week trips and reduce the number of times they travel by a third. Those are some of the, we don't know how we're going to fix it, but these are some of the thought processes. We know we have to fix it. That doesn't mean we're not going to address our municipal emissions. We have to do that too, because we have to walk the talk. We have to be able to stand up and say Whistler has done what it can internally. We can't just wash our hands of the responsibility and hope somebody else is going to deal with our problems. So internally, absolutely. So we've got the highest ridership transit service in British Columbia. And our plan is to grow that, get people out of cars more. There's very few things that we can do. We flared our landfill gas, and that was the most significant thing we've done to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions. These are our greenhouse gas emissions coming to the landfill, because you know that methane has 23 times the greenhouse gas component of CO2. We started flaring in 2007, and that's the drop. Makes us feel really good, but we still haven't got 20% reduction. We got more work to do. So anyway, that's a lot to think about. There's a lot there. I've taken a lot of your time already. It only leaves 40 minutes for question and answers, but let's go to the discussion.
When you say you dropped the flaring there, is that energy that could have been used to fuel composting plant or some other kind of plant?
We're in the process of testing the quality of the methane, and should it prove viable, we will use it to generate heat in our wastewater treatment plant, potentially light up street lights in the Athletes Village. Our new Athletes Village is just adjacent to the old landfill where this gas is being captured. So absolutely we're looking at that waste gas to energy or using it simply for other purposes like lighting up lights or outdoor fireplaces, because it has to be flared anyway. Thanks. Yeah.
First of all, let me say your presentation is visually very impressive.
Thank you.
A couple of things struck me. How are you going to handle the situation when you have reached that population maximum of 14,000? And people have to start telling their kids, I'm sorry, you can't stay. We're full up. Or no, mother, you can't come live with us because we're full up. The other question would be, we're talking about the environment as kind of a mother with an apple pie issue. Nobody's going to argue too much. But we also know that the Earth's environment has changed considerably and pretty drastically long before us Homo sapiens came to occupy. How are you going to, or how can you get away with telling those people that don't agree with you 100% on the future of the environment? How can you tell them, sorry, sit down, we're not interested in listening to you? Can you not protect at least the rights of the individual minorities to be heard and occasionally even respected? Because sometimes, minorities are right.
Ken, can you paraphrase his question really well, your answer? Because I'm only picking up your voice.
Okay, I'll give that a try. There was two questions. The first one was about what will we tell people who can't move to Whistler when we've hit our population, target population. I'm not sure I know exactly the answer to that, but my assumption is that there's going to be availability within Whistler. But we, like many places in the world, I think we've reached an understanding that not everybody can live where they choose to live, and there are choices. There are choices to be made. So one of the things that we're doing to provide the ability of transgenerational occupation is modifying our housing covenants so that those people who have purchased within our restricted inventory can pass that on to their children, and we're building more inventory. So this restricted inventory is, you may think that it's discriminational by saying you must work in Whistler to live in it, but because we're a community that's committed to our success, we think that's a reasonable requirement for that. That's restricted inventory. And to answer your second question is, how do you allow the minorities to have their voice? And everybody should have the freedom to have their opinion heard and respected. And you suggested that minorities in some cases are right. I don't disagree with any of that, and part of our job as politicians is to try and craft solutions that give people options and choice. So an example is pay parking downtown Vancouver. You may not like the fact that to go downtown in Vancouver, you might have to pay for parking, but you have choices. You can either go down and pay for parking, or you can leave your car at home and take transit, or you can walk, or you can bicycle, or you can purchase. Decisions have to be made based on the interests of the majority and the whole. And unfortunately, as politicians, we're challenged to try and find those decisions that meet the greatest need and serve the greatest good, and yet provide options and choice. And so I think you're right. It would be draconian and dictatorial to force people to do one thing or the other, but there are always choices. In life we have choices. So you have a choice, you want to drive an SUV, I personally think you should pay a penalty and a price for that. But if you want to drive a smart car or ride your bike, there should be preferential pricing for that. And that's where the society is moving. There are costs to do it, costs for taking non-sustainable actions. And simply put, there's no more free ride. We can't continue to give a free ride to those unsustainable practices. We're hitting the walls of the funnel. I hope I've answered your questions. Sir?
I'm fascinated by your backcasting concept, and I'd like to pose a hypothetical. Some years back on Saltspring Island, there was a timber company that came and on private land was clear-cutting forests. And finally, because of grassroots pressure and activism, they left the island. Had this TNS program been in place there, hypothetically, before the timber company came, and there was this kind of community dialogue that you're proposing and consensus, how could that have been prevented in the first place?
You know, potentially, and it's hard, it's fun to play hypothetical. I can imagine two things, two conversations that could have happened. One is, once the environmental groups, once a process had been committed to establish what the minimum amounts of protected areas would be on the island, then the areas that were outside of that would be available for industry and commercial exploitation. That's one of the things that we've tried to do in Whistler. We've suggested that we've developed this protected areas policy. So the environmentalists who are very concerned, and rightly, about protecting ecosystems, critical ecosystems, have a large sense of comfort that those ecosystems are fundamentally protected and that logging or development is not going to consume all of them. So when you've addressed all of those interests, then it allows for, we're in the process of applying for a community forest application. We've partnered with our 2 local First Nations communities, and we want to manage the local forests for integrated uses. And it suggests that we will be logging. We might not be logging commercially because we've committed to a set of principles based on ecosystem management. So again, it comes back to fundamental values. So if you can allow logging, then, if once ecosystem-based principles are maintained, a certain minimum amount that the community agrees to of necessary old-growth forests has been protected. So I don't know in that case whether they would have depleted the last old growth, or whether the community, if it had been comforted that, say, 25%, and I'm making numbers up out of my head, let's say 25% was a number the community could agree on was sufficient old growth forest to protect, then beyond that, you've got the freedom and the flexibility to apply other values to the rest of the land base. But one of the problems that we have as communities is that we get into these fights in the uncertainty of the future. So we're protecting the last stand of forest because we're afraid that in the absence of any other grander scale policy, they could all be gone. But if we ensure that the environmentally sensitive areas are respected at a high level, then we can be comfortable about logging. I think there was one back there first, and then I'll come to you.
I just wondered if your early planning stage included
It's a good, thanks for the question, because part of the community engagement process was an intentional and aggressive outreach. We did not wait for groups to come to us. We called it the traveling roadshow, and we had our administrator and our senior staff and our trainers that we trained who were available and had presentations packaged, and we put out invitations and we invited ourselves. So we called up the Rotary and we said, we're coming to the Rotary. We're coming to the school. We're coming to the real estate board, the realtors meetings. We're coming to the Arts Council meetings. So we did not want people out in the community to come back to us and say, you didn't consult us. So we had a list, we went through it, we went out, and then we had meeting, after open house and web-based input and forums. You could communicate in a variety of ways. So that said, it's easier to do in smaller communities, and it strikes me in this community there's a tremendous level of community participation. So you're well advantaged that way. Bigger cities have a much greater challenge, but there's programs that have been involved. For instance, in Calgary, they borrowed up a model from Chicago called the Imagine program. And so they engaged about 20,000 people in the city of Calgary to envision their future. But absolutely, we did everything we could to try and engage the youth. I think my feeling is we had more high school students come than the young kids, who were in the workforce, the 25-year-olds who were too busy partying and having fun skiing. So we did have I don't think we had as broad a representation as we wanted, but it wasn't for lack of trying.
On transportation, this morning's Globe and Mail featured the road to Whistler. When you were going through this process and the Olympics are announced, there's a railway that's been going for years right across by Whistler, and you've got a nice compact village center. How come it didn't seem to the outsider that this was looked at as a more feasible way, given your level of people traveling up there?
Yeah, it seems like a no-brainer, doesn't it? You weren't there, but Eckert I don't know if even Eckert remembers, but in the election of 2002, I campaigned I would only support the Olympics if it brought rail to Whistler. That was my campaign promise. And out of respect for that, and I wasn't the only one, there was a widespread community interest in rail. And about the same time, the province was talking about shutting off the one train a day to Whistler. Bannock hired, and I apologize, I can't remember the gentleman's name, the man who runs the West Coast Express. So arguably the preeminent person in the province who could tell you whether a rail service was viable or not. And they paid him a bunch of money to investigate the potential for rail, not just for the Olympics, but for Whistler post-games. And even I had to reluctantly accept his conclusion that it was not going to happen.
Not enough population?
No, essentially right. We don't have the population density that Europe has, and that's what makes their rail systems successful. In addition, North Americans don't love the train like Europeans do. They don't have it as part of their culture. We have a car-based culture. So even with the most aggressive assumptions about mode shifting onto rail, it was going to be more expensive, take more time than the car, and require a $2 billion investment in the rail line before you could even get the train down to 2.5 hours from Vancouver to Whistler. Right now it takes 3.5 hours. It was built for 1914 rail stock, and it is on a very curvy route. A high-speed train, $7 billion. Basically a tunnel from Vancouver to Whistler, because the high-speed trains can't take those corners at that speed. They have tilt train technology in Europe where the trains actually lean over to help them with the corners a little bit faster. He investigated up one side and down the other. I read all the reports. There were some assumptions there that I didn't quite agree with, but even if I gave it as much credibility as possible, the economics simply were not there, and the investment in the road was only $600 million. We fought the road, just so people know. We didn't like the idea of a 4-lane road. In fact, if it hadn't been for our intercession, there would be a 4-lane highway to Whistler. The Ministry of Transportation in Victoria thought 4 lanes to Whistler. Wouldn't you like that? Well, most communities would, but you turn those things on your head and you say, what do you like better? Parking lots or forests? Roads or forests? And it's a pretty simple answer. We thrive on the environment and beautiful forests. And so we argued successfully to have the highway transition down from 4 lanes at Squamish to 3. So it's 4 lanes, Vancouver, Squamish, 3 lanes, Squamish to Whistler, and hopefully there'll never be a day when they 4-lane it. And we're fighting like crazy not to have an expanded highway through town. Because we want to drive, congestion drives alternative use. Well, and we're going to get into a bit of a squabble. Pemberton wants economic growth and they want better access and they don't like having to slow down the traffic through Whistler. There is a highway bypass on the right-of-way reserved through Whistler. But again, we hope that we can make convincing enough arguments that bypass never gets built. So thanks for the question. We looked hard at rail. Other questions? Sir.
Ken, just a clarification on some of the numbers. I think I heard you say you've got a population right now of about 9,500.
Mm-hmm.
Your target is 14,000, current target, and you currently have something in the neighborhood of about 400 beds, like employee beds?
4,000.
4,000 right now.
Those are restricted beds. The rest of our 12,000 employees live in market accommodation that we don't have control over.
Okay, so currently out of the 9,500, 4,000 of those are employee beds. What are you looking at as a target for your employee beds when you're building on the 14?
I believe the number's another 2,500. We're building the Whistler Athletes Village. It's going to provide accommodation for approximately 1,500 additional employees. As I said, the Athletes Village will convert post-games to about 370 residential units. 85%, sorry, not residential, 370 units, 85% of those will be resident restricted. We have another project that was recently approved, Rainbow Development. Again, 85-15 split, 15% market and 85% resident. Between those two projects, we think we have enough inventory to help us get to that 14,000 population and the necessary number of restricted beds to provide 75% of the workforce living in Whistler over time. Does that clarify? Yes.
I was privileged to be at the session with Dr. Roberge in Whistler.
Oh.
The natural steps, and I think it was fantastic, very inspirational. But I think it's even more inspirational that you've done something with them. But I spent half the time in North Van and half the time in Saltspring. My question is related to affordable housing. It's a problem on the North Shore, it's a problem in Saltspring, it's a problem in Whistler. Now, in your model of looking at housing, did you look at family sustainable housing that's economical?
I think we've looked at just about everything. What we've ended up with is what we think is one of the only viable options that was practical. So we've ended up with the solution that was actually achievable. And essentially it's this. If we can provide free land, then the cost of construction will be the minimum sale price, and we fix that price over time. That's our definition. It's not affordable housing, it's not social housing. In trying to address families, we've had to set our minds to the appropriate mix. So that's the number of single family, which is the smallest number, studio, 1 bedroom, 2 bedroom. We now have a fairly good inventory of 3-bedroom townhouses, which are about 1,700 square feet, 1,800 square feet max, that a family could move into. But it has been meeting the needs of a family has been one of the more challenging issues. And of course, a high demand to have single family. I'm trying to remember, we've got about 20 restricted single family houses. And Rainbow, actually Tom was in, were you in one? Not Tom, Mike. In Spruce Grove, in the subdivision where Mike was, we had 10 single family homes included as part of the mix. But Rainbow, the subdivision I was mentioning that we approved, which hasn't been built, has about 75, we really made a step to move towards meeting that demand. 75 single-family home sites will be delivered there at the cost at $100,000, $110,000 each was the target. So how much, and then we are going to have an accepted formula for building the single-family houses on top of that to try and keep the prices under control. So hopefully all in. And again, people laugh, this is not affordable, we know. $500,000 for a house is not a definition of affordability. But it's about a third of the value of a house out in the marketplace in Whistler. So it's more accessible, it gives families more options, it doesn't meet every need. We have not been able to do socialized housing, subsidized housing. Simply put, there's such a shortage of monies available for subsidized housing in Canada. The need goes to the large centers where they have the most dire need and the largest populations of homeless and mentally challenged who need that housing money. So they're not going to give it to Whistler. The community has not invested a nickel of taxpayer dollars into the housing. It's all come from this, the DCC fund, from developer contributions or cost recovery. The Athletes Village is essentially cost recovery because the province gave us the land and we've created our own corporation that's going to build the housing and then sell it at the cost of construction. Sir.
Thanks very much. I really appreciate your talk. And the only thing that bothers me is that it's starting me thinking about how we can use the natural step to sustain an unnatural step. Like, if you projected what, like your greenhouse gas emissions graph is really something else. Makes me think of the fact that we bring 91 trucks to one of our stores to bring our food here every week. So, how much of your greenhouse gas emissions are going to balloon up with the Winter Games? Like, are we not, I mean, it's really admirable to try and sustain a community, but wouldn't your community, you know, if it was going to be a viable community, wouldn't it encompass things like Pemberton Valley so you could get some food as a base for your economy as well? Yeah. Like, we're dealing with...
It does.
The fact that Bill Reese indicates, for instance, that the city of Vancouver consumes their resources from a land base that's 22 times the size of the Fraser Valley from Hope to the sea. Like, that's where its needs and it's the pollution that has to be absorbed by the system. So we're dealing with such a colossal problem here that what we're trying to do in our community, you and yours and we and ours, are trying to overcome the difficulties that a totally unsustainable milieu generates. How do we deal with that?
Well, and it's great. You've summarized the challenge that we have. We have created an unsustainable society. Accept it, measure it, and commit to changing. That's all we can do. So as I said, you know, we have built Whistler. It is unsustainable. What we need to do is measure how it's unsustainable and understand that over time we can our commitment is to steadily decrease our unsustainable practices. We can't do it overnight. It is a journey, it's a process. It's an absolutely necessary process. We don't have any choice. So, and we have to stay optimistic and be hopeful. You know, I should have said that at the outset. We need to communicate hope to everybody every time they come into the room. And that's why I kind of referenced the ingenuity and inventiveness of human beings. So together we can figure this out. You know, one of the ways, well, I won't get into one of the ways. There's lots of ways we can do it. We're going to have to try everything. Let me specifically answer you. You referenced the Olympics. You know, what about the emissions of the Olympics? So a couple of things about that. VANOC is committed to carbon neutrality for their games, whatever. And actually, they've gone a step further beyond where I thought they would go. We thought they would simply plant trees. But they've actually engaged the Suzuki Foundation, which is very respected on the issue, to verify what they're doing. So assuming that the Olympic Games are going to happen anyway, we're trying to do them as green or sustainable as possible. And if you won't mind, I'll take another minute, Andrew, that we quartered, so our games are 1/4 the size, the ecological footprint, environmental footprint of past games, by intentionally downsizing the games. So where in Lillehammer 60,000 people watch the ski jumps, 12,000 will be accommodated in Whistler. That's less than 1/4 that will have to be transported up and down the highway. So you can imagine the emissions saved. It doesn't mean it's emissions free. The rest of the emissions will be offset. And then post-games, we need to understand what the impacts of those legacies that are left in Whistler. So we'll have a shuttle going to the Nordic Center south of town. We'll use that sliding center as sustainably as possible. They put for instance, shutters over top of the whole track so that the sun can't melt the ice or will melt it less. There are a number of things that they've done to be as sustainable minded as possible. But you're absolutely right, the size of the challenge is immense. We can't let it stop us from throwing up our hands and walking away from it. And it's going to be a gradual process. But that's why I stand in front of you. Whistler's trying to say we're taking a position, hopefully Saltspring will take a position, and soon we'll have enough critical mass that we're all doing this together, and it's going to get easier. The more people that get on board, the easier it gets.
It's like calling it the natural first step. I really admire what you're doing.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ken Melamed. I'm sure that Ken will stick around, and if you have any further questions, he'll be happy to answer them. But I thought I'd give you the chance to wrap this up now. We've been here for over an hour and a half, and so I just want to say that Ken has been very generous. He's done this, he's come here to Salt Spring for very little cost, just basically the expenses. We were going to pass the hat around to cover some of the costs, but you were very generous when you came in through the door, so we didn't pass the hat around. But as you leave, if you feel that you've gained something today, then please contribute some more. You should know that anything excess over and above our expenses will go to the Salt Spring Island Land Bank, and Neddy is at the back, happy to collect any donations as well directly. Before we finally close, though, James Falcon, I asked him if he might ask the community for some gifts to hand to Ken, and he's been extraordinarily successful. It's a bit embarrassing. He's got a huge truckload of stuff here. James, why don't you come on down and just quickly share what you've managed to put together for Ken to take back to Whistler.
Wow. Thank you very much.
Beware of Salt Springers bearing gifts. I just want to go over and acknowledge some of the people who managed to make donations. If I didn't have a day job, I'm sure I could have brought a truckload in. From the Salt Spring Fire Department, the chief has given you one of his patches.
Beautiful.
You may like to present it to your fire department, and you are now an honorary member of the Salt Spring Volunteer Firefighters. We need as many as possible.
Thank you.
So if we need you, we will call you at 3 in the morning. Also, we have clothing from Ganges Garment Company, Mark's Work Warehouse, and also Salt Spring Air. A pastel, you'll notice that I haven't attempted to show you what's in there and you may not want to unwrap it until you get back home. We have a pastel print from Gail Sibley from her Salt Spring Island collection. Bodder's Beach is the name of it. Also, we have a book from ISG, Islanders of Self-Government. They have contributed a book called Enchanted Isles, the Southern Gulf Islands. From Mowat's Trading, we have the first 100 years of Charles Kahn. We also have a $25 gift certificate from Sabina's Fine Books, Salt Spring Books. From what I understand about your background, you love hiking. That's one of your big pastimes. Well, Salt Spring Books has contributed the Hiking on the Gulf Islands by Charles Kahn. Thrifty Foods and Island Farms Institute have also contributed stuff. For example, Thrifties, they believe if you come back, you should take the bus. So they've given you a booklet of coupons for a new transit system.
That's if I don't bring my bike and ride everywhere.
Yeah, well, you can do. We might get something. You can put your bike on the bus, on the front of it. Island Farmers Institute, they have contributed for a Saltspring Island Fall Fair weekend pass for 2 for this year for you to come to the Fall Fair on Salt Spring Island.
Wow, tremendous.
Quickly, we have 2 thermal coffee mugs, one from the credit union, one from TJ Coffee Beans. We have stone ground mustard from Sea Change. We have homemade cheese from Salt Spring Island Cheese Company. David Wood couldn't be here today, but he gives you his best. From Salt Spring Pictures, I have contributed Ometepe coffee because you're going to need the coffee for those mugs. And I had a hard time getting these ones in. I was actually thinking of Andrew and a few close friends. 3 Salt Spring Fine Ales from the Gulf Islands Brewery from Murray Hunter, and that's Island Ale.
Tremendous.
From Arlene Dashwood, Salt Spring Island Apple Juice. And from Salt Spring Vineyards, Blackberry Port. Salt Spring made.
Wow.
So I don't know. I wish I could get more.
Fantastic. You have been such a wonderful audience and so generous. I'm touched.
Oh, but last but not least, we print our own money on Salt Spring Island, and we have here for you a ½ ounce of brilliant uncirculated. That's the right word. It's there's only been 801 made. They're $50 silver coins.
Wow.
So this is one coin.
Oh, I really am overwhelmed. Thank you very much.
And that's from the
Invite me
Salt
back
Spring Monetary
anytime,
Foundation.
okay? Thanks so much. Actually, as you go, before you go, I share. I don't know if it was on the slide. If you saw it, we have all of our information is online. We don't print anything. We intentionally did not bring printed materials for you. So hopefully you can access it. If you don't have a computer, go to your library or something. Whistler.ca or Whistler2020.ca. There's a tremendous amount of information there and all the links you need. And of course, you can call me or Eckert anytime, and we're happy to provide any insight or share any information. Thanks again.